Knowledge and Acknowledgement of the Work, August 25th, 1945. In order to come under fewer laws, we deliberately put ourselves under more laws, that is, under the work. To come under better influences, we must put ourselves under influences that do not come from life, but from the conscious circle of humanity. Let us suppose a man never works on himself. Supposing he never makes any attempt to remember himself, and although he has repeatedly heard about it, that is, knows about this idea of the work, he has never brought himself to the point of making any effort to remember himself. This man makes no work effort. Or again, let us suppose he never observes himself. Again, he makes no work effort. In such a case, the work cannot have any possible action on him, nor is he in any way connected with the work internally. Why is he not connected with the work? He makes no attempt to apply the work to himself and to realize its truth in himself. Perhaps he never thinks about it except in an idle or sarcastic way. Now, a great deal depends on how we think about the ideas of this work. It is only the deepest part of us that can change, and unless we think from this deepest part, the work remains something external to us, something outside us. A man may have knowledge of this work and not acknowledge it, or again, he may acknowledge it to himself. Certainly, this deeper acknowledgement must take time because there are so many layers of eyes in us that do not wish to work, or that make the work merely a matter of memory. That is, they remember the ideas formatorily, but do not feel them emotionally. For this reason, the work says that a man must value the ideas, and that means that he must feel them emotionally. You have often heard me speak of this before, but it cannot be spoken of enough. The work is not something that you hear about from time to time, but is something that you must eventually be always with you. The work is not something that you hear about from time to time, but is something that must eventually be always with you. Something that you eventually think about even more than your interests and problems in life. This takes time. As I said, it is the way in which we think of the ideas of the work that either makes or does not make deep connection with it. Of course, if we do not value it, it cannot affect our thinking or change it. The emotions, the affections, make connections. It is our most internal thinking which counts, i.e. how we think privately in our own solitariness, behind the facade. Because from here springs everything essential, and from here essence can grow. Not from outer thought or life thought. It is possible to talk about the work quite well, and yet one does not acknowledge it deeply. That is essentially. As Mr. Ouspensky once said, we have a great many overcoats to take off. When the work begins to enter a man more deeply, it sets up a continual conflict. Not a violent, agitated conflict, but a quiet, almost wordless conflict. He finds that wherever he goes, whatever he does, he is aware of the work in him. He begins to see life in the light of the work. In this respect, he begins to become different from other people who are only immersed in the things of life. Sometimes he sees more clearly and sometimes more obscurely, but he is aware that something is going on in him, in his depths, which previously, before he met the work, did not exist. Of course, by this time he knows quite well that it is useless to try to persuade himself of the truth of this work. It is not a question of persuasion, but of acknowledgement. And acknowledgement comes by perceiving the truth of it through applying it to oneself. Each of the ideas of the work begins to expand into larger and larger meaning. He may begin actually to see that the work is so, and yet he still will not consent to it deeply. His being resists his knowledge. He does not do what he knows, and so as a rule does not know what he does. And yet all the time he is aware that there is something new in him that is always acting on him in a silent way, without persuasion, without compulsion. So he feels a constant heat, a pain. The work is now in him. Now it is necessary for a man in this state to work on himself and to meditate on, that is, pay attention to, or another of the ideas of the work and see its ramifications. He begins to learn that it is necessary for him particularly to try to remember himself. For the act of self-remembering puts us in contact with the influences that otherwise do not reach us. Thinking is not enough. Self-remembering is necessary, and it is not thinking. Again, he does not let himself get negative, because that spoils everything. And finally, he remembers that there are 3 lines of work, and that when he cannot work on one line, he can always work on another. I will add one thing that was said recently. You must begin to isolate yourself from life influences through non-identifying in order to make space of yourself to feel this work. You have no room in yourself for this work? How can it possibly influence you?